guys and gals, this is Dan, another edition of the Storage Doc, where we answer your questions about all things storage. And excited to have you again today. I want to start off with our storage basics, and we're going to talk a little bit about how do I get from disk to server. How does the data flow actually work? What are the main components to managing a storage system so that I can effectively get my data from A to B? So there's some nuances in there depending on what storage vendor you're going to work, and this is a high-level overview, so I'm going to keep it simple, and we'll go from there. So right here I've got my disks. I might have one, I might have 3, 5, 10, 2,000, whatever, but these are my disks, right? The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put these disks together in what's called a RAID group, okay? And I might have multiple RAID groups, and you've probably heard the term RAID. Some common RAID levels might be 5 and 6 and 1, and then you might have some combinations of some other levels, so you might end up with like a 50 or a 60 or a 10, and we'll talk about those in their own segment because they really deserve their own segment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a group, say maybe this group right here, I'm going to put them into a RAID group, and maybe this group right here, I'll put them into a RAID group, okay? And I'll configure that RAID group based on the performance characteristics that I want to realize out of them. And then I'm going to put those RAID groups into something like, I'll use some vendor terminology, maybe an aggregate or a storage pool, or that's really what they call them, one of those two things. This is basically like a collection of one or more RAID groups into a single logical disk, okay? So if this RAID group was 100 gigs and this RAID group was 100 gigs, right, maybe this is 200 gigs. So this piece right here is really essential. It's how we overcome some of the limitations of just having a few disks or in one to get up to bigger and bigger and bigger sets of disks. And so I've got my disks, I put them in my RAID groups. Usually within your aggregate or your storage pool, these RAID groups will always be the same type. So you might have multiple storage pools, one maybe from a RAID 50, one maybe from a RAID 10, for example. And from there, we're going to do a couple of different things. If we're EMC, we go straight from a storage pool to our LUN, and we start making LUNs. LUNs are the logical partitions of this space that actually my servers actually see. So servers typically don't see the storage pool directly. They're going to see some partition, some little piece of this that they're presented. So maybe this LUN is 10 gigabytes, maybe this LUN is 60 gigabytes, maybe this LUN is 140 gigabytes, etc. Okay, and those might get presented to one server, multiple servers, etc. Now, some vendors, like NetApp and EqualLogic, for example, have other components in the middle between storage processor and LUN. And those divisions are designed to help with things like snapshots and other management backup and recovery functions of a storage array that we'll talk about later. And so they actually introduced something up here called a volume. And you've heard that term before because volumes are all over the place. And a volume is a subset of a storage pool or an aggregate, or it could even be maybe a subset of multiple RAID groups, for example. And this volume then gets presented. From there, you carve LUNs out of it, and then you put those out to your server. So again, you might have multiple volumes from an aggregate And why would you ever do that? Well, let's say I've got 2 LUNs for a SQL server that I want to do a snapshot every 2 hours. Well, maybe I put those in the same volume and I just take a snapshot of this whole volume instead of having to do 2 individual ones for my LUNs. That's just an example. There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't do it. Some vendors think this is unnecessary, like EMC. That's why they kind of just go straight here. So you've got volumes. If you have a NetApp, you have another little thing called a queue tree. And a queue tree, again, is just another little subset of a volume. It's optional. You don't have to use it at all, but you might use it. And queue trees really function for quota. That's how I do it. That's a lot of what is. These can be snapped individually apart from a volume as well, and they can be replicated also individually. But I think most customers probably are using queue trees to limit quotas, to set a storage limit so that when this runs out of space, it doesn't affect this, okay? And it doesn't affect this. So a lot of times where we use these is like for user home directories. So you give each user 5 gigs of storage, and you set you link this to Active Directory, and each user gets 5 gigs of storage, and that way you never have to worry about this volume running out of space. So that's a little bit about how the storage system works. So let's recap it. I got a group of disks, and I'm going to take that group of disks and I'm going to make one or more RAID groups out of it. And I'm going to take those RAID groups and I'm going to create one logical grouping out of it, and that's going to be my aggregate or my storage pool. And then from there, I'm going to present LUNs. Now I might have a couple of steps in the middle depending on my storage vendor, but I'm going to present LUNs, and those LUNs are what my server is actually going to see. So what I put on these LUNs, the storage system doesn't know about. To the storage system, it's all data. The server sees this, so the LUN is the important piece that translates between the server and the disks. So that's a little bit about storage. That's some basic high-level overview. We'll talk more about some individual components like RAID groups in another episode. Thanks, guys.
This podcast has been brought to you courtesy of Reliant Technology. Visit us online at www.reliant-technology.com.